Every age writes its own history, but some chapters are cut, some ideas buried, some visions quietly shelved. Tonight we're not just opening a dusty archive. We're opening a sealed server room in the heart of Silicon Valley to read a manifesto that might have changed everything you're doing online right now. This is Deleted Scenes of History, the Silicon Valley Schism. The story begins not with kings or constitutions, but with cables and code. We picture Silicon Valley as a place of garages, college dropouts, and legendary partnerships. A mythic arena where innovation always wins, and the future is always open. But myths leave things out. In the mid-1990s, as the World Wide Web was taking shape, one co-founder of a now iconic technology company drafted a document so radical, so disruptive, that it threatened not just competitors, but the entire model of how money would be made online. It was called simply the decentralized future. In crisp technical prose, this manifesto described an internet that belonged to everyone, a web of open protocols where users owned their data. Privacy was a default, and no single corporation could become a gatekeeper. Imagine social media without algorithmic manipulation, search without surveillance, commerce without monopolies. That was the world envisioned in these pages. But it never happened. The memo was buried in an internal archive labeled for discussion only, and the co-founder who wrote it quietly left the company within a year. The version of the internet we live in today, centralized, commercialized, surveilled, rose in its place. This is the Silicon Valley Schism, a fork in history where we chose profit over principle. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand the valley itself in the 1990s. Venture capital was flooding in. Startups promised to change the world, but burned through cash. Netscape had just gone public. Yahoo was a home page to everything, and Google was still a research project. Open standards like HTTP and SMTP had created a borderless commons, but behind the scenes a new race was on, not just to build the internet, but to own it. Our anonymous co-founder, we'll call him Alex Carter, saw the danger early. In his 28-page document, later nicknamed the Lost Manifesto, he wrote, "If the net becomes a network of walled gardens, we will recreate the worst monopolies of the past with the power of the future." Carter's plan proposed 3 pillars: a universal identity system controlled by the user, not by corporations; end-to-end encrypted communication as a non-negotiable default; a cooperative protocol for digital commerce preventing any single payment processor from dominating. It read like a constitution for cyberspace, but to investors it read like a threat to profit. Encryption slowed down ad targeting. User-controlled identity made data harvesting impossible. A cooperative payment protocol undermined exclusive deals. In a single board meeting, the decision was made. The memo would not move forward. This was the first deleted scene of the digital age. Not a lost parchment, but a lost possibility. While the press celebrated each IPO, inside boardrooms a quieter revolution was being strangled in its cradle. And the consequences reach you every time you open a browser, swipe on a feed, or consent to terms you didn't write. To really grasp what was at stake, we need to step inside the decentralized future itself. In the next few minutes, we'll open the document as if it were a lost constitution of the Internet. line by line, pillar by pillar. The first pillar Carter described was user-controlled identity. Today, most people log in through accounts issued by a handful of giants. Your digital self, your photos, contacts, even your health data lives on their servers. Carter proposed the opposite, a personal, portable identity vault owned and encrypted by you. Instead of asking Facebook, Google, or Apple for permission to prove who you are, you would grant them limited, revocable keys. Your name, your credentials, your browsing history would travel with you, not be copied and monetized by every platform you touched. Technically, this was feasible even then. Public key cryptography had been invented in the 1970s. Smart cards and early tokens were emerging. Carter's design used open-source software and distributed directories, something like a digital passport, stamped by math, not by corporations. But to venture capitalists, user-controlled identity meant a nightmare. No captive audiences, no ad targeting, no data resale. It would be like building a mall where every shopper wore a mask you couldn't remove. The second pillar was end-to-end encryption by default. In 1996, email was like a postcard. Anyone along the route could read it. Carter argued that privacy should be the baseline, not the premium feature. All communications, email, messaging, file transfers, would be automatically encrypted, unreadable to providers. Even the company hosting your mailbox would not hold the keys. It's hard to overstate how radical that sounded then. The U.S. government was still fighting to restrict the export of strong encryption, treating it like a weapon. Companies feared being cut off from law enforcement contracts. Yet Carter insisted, a network without default privacy will become a network of surveillance. His third pillar was the boldest, a cooperative protocol for digital commerce. In the mid-90s, online payment was a wild frontier. Credit card numbers over plain text forms. Carter's memo proposed an open, distributed payment rail where no single processor, bank, or platform could own the flow. Think of it as a neutral highway where every merchant and every customer connected under the same transparent rules. That protocol never materialized. Instead, proprietary gateways arose, exclusive deals were struck, and over time a handful of companies controlled the toll booth of digital trade. Carter had wanted a digital commons. What we got was a patchwork of private fiefdoms. The memo also sketched an alternate governance model, a non-profit standards body elected by developers and users, not by shareholders. Every major protocol, identity, encryption, commerce would evolve in public view. It was essentially an attempt to write a Bill of Rights for cyberspace before the land rush began. Inside the company, reactions were swift and divided. Engineers were excited. Marketing teams were nervous. The board was alarmed. A meeting was called. Carter argued his case. We can be the steward of the open net or the owner of a closed one. We can profit once, or we can empower everyone and profit forever. Minutes from that meeting, never published, show phrases like not aligned with revenue model, too political, and legal exposure. Within weeks, the project was shelved. Carter was reassigned, then quietly left. The company pivoted to a walled garden strategy and was rewarded handsomely on the stock market. The schism was complete. What makes this a deleted scene of history is not just that a document was lost. Instead, a path was lost, a version of the internet that could have made surveillance capitalism much harder to build. The pillars Carter proposed would later resurface piecemeal in blockchain identity experiments, in apps like Signal and decentralized payment protocols, but never at the scale they might have had in 1996. First came the rise of walled gardens. LL had pioneered the model in the dial-up era, but now it was turbocharged. Proprietary portals, exclusive content, closed APIs. Every company wanted not just to serve the internet, but to be the internet. Without a user-controlled identity system, every platform issued its own passports and built its own databases. Instead of a single, portable digital self, you created hundreds of logins, each a copy of you owned by someone else. Second, privacy became a premium instead of a right. With end-to-end encryption off the table, data traveled in the clear for years. Ad networks grew up in the gaps, harvesting behavior to target messages with surgical precision. The same infrastructure that once delivered banner ads now underpins political micro-targeting and mass surveillance. And third, online commerce consolidated. Payment processors and app stores built proprietary rails. A handful of platforms now decide which apps you can install, which merchants you can pay, and which creators can earn a living. What Carter feared, recreating the worst monopolies of the past with the power of the future, had come to pass. But imagine a different story. Imagine that in 1996, Carter's 3 pillars had been adopted not by one company, but as an industry standard. Imagine an internet where your digital passport is yours alone, cryptographically secure, moved with you from service to service. You log in, grant minimal permissions, and revoke them at will. No giant profile in the cloud, no data broker warehouses. Your messages, photos, and calls are end-to-end encrypted by default. Service providers store only scrambled bits they can't read. Governments need warrants and due process, not backdoors. Surveillance capitalism is a non-starter because the raw material, your behavioral data, never leaves your vault. Commerce runs on an open protocol like email. Any developer can plug in. Any merchant can accept payments without a gatekeeper. App stores compete on service, not control. New ideas flourish because permission isn't required from a single platform owner. Social media in this world looks more like public infrastructure. Small, interoperable communities flourish. Algorithms are transparent and user-tunable. Misinformation still exists. Human nature hasn't changed, but the incentives to amplify outrage are weaker, because engagement isn't directly monetized by a single ad broker. This isn't utopia. Bad actors still exploit technology. Governments still try to control speech. But the architecture of the network resists concentration, the way the architecture of the original internet resisted single points of failure. In this alternate timeline, many of today's tech giants would still exist, but as service providers inside an open ecosystem, not as sovereigns over digital fiefdoms. Back in our reality, each of Carter's pillars eventually resurfaced in fragmentary form. Decentralized identity is being trialed under the W3C. End-to-end encryption powers apps like Signal and WhatsApp. Open payment protocols echo in blockchain and cryptocurrency experiments. But without early adoption at scale, these remain niches, struggling against entrenched interests. The schism was not inevitable. It was a decision repeated in meeting after meeting, quarter after quarter, to prioritize short-term profit and control over long-term openness and trust. And that decision shaped the digital lives of billions of people who never knew they had another choice. We've seen what happened to the network, but what happened to the person who tried to warn us? Who was the author of the lost manifesto once the schism became reality? After the boardroom defeat, Carter resigned quietly. No press release, no dramatic exit. He accepted a severance package, left Silicon Valley, and disappeared from the trade press. For nearly a decade, his name surfaced only in obscure mailing lists and cryptography forums. In 2002, he resurfaced at a small academic conference in Berlin. The topic: peer-to-peer architectures. Carter delivered a talk titled Protocols as Politics, a dry title that concealed a fiery argument that the design of networks is never neutral, that every line of code encodes a set of power relationships. Those in the room recall his slides full of flowcharts and his voice full of regret. In private correspondence from this period, later posted online with his permission, Carter wrote, "I wanted to build the roads. They built the toll booths. History will say the public chose convenience over freedom. That's not true. They were never offered the choice." Through the 2000s, his ideas scattered like seeds. One group of former colleagues launched an open-source identity project inspired by his designs. Another group tried to build an encrypted messaging protocol that worked over email. Early blockchain developers cited Carter's writings in obscure white papers. Yet without large-scale backing, these efforts remained marginal. Then, in the early 2010s, the privacy debate erupted again. Mass surveillance revelations, social media scandals, data breaches. Suddenly, Carter's warnings sounded less like paranoia and more like prophecy. He began giving interviews under his real name, describing the lost manifesto and urging a return to open standards. Clips of these talks circulate online today. A tall man in his 50s, plain shirt, no slides, saying simply, "We can still choose decentralization. We just have to want it more than convenience." Carter never built another unicorn company. Instead, he became a quiet mentor to younger technologists, steering them toward ethical design, privacy by default, and open protocols. In 2017, he co-founded a nonprofit foundation dedicated to public digital infrastructure, funding small projects around the world, mesh networks in rural communities, open payment pilots in Africa, identity vault prototypes in Europe. His story is a reminder that not every lost chapter stays lost. Ideas can go underground, hibernate, and return in new hands. Many of the decentralized tools people experiment with today, from self-sovereign identity to peer-to-peer marketplaces, trace conceptual lineages back to Carter's 1996 memo. This also reframes the schism. It wasn't just a single missed chance. It was a fork in a long road, one branch paved and lit by corporations, another winding and rocky, traveled by volunteers and activists. Carter walked the second path. In doing so, he preserved knowledge, techniques, and language that a future movement might still use to build an open internet at scale. And that brings us to the present. In our next section, we'll leave Carter's personal story and look at today's battlefield: privacy laws, decentralized protocols, the push for interoperability. To ask a hard question: Is it already too late to cross back over the schism? Or are we standing at a second chance? We've walked through the lost manifesto, the fork in the road, and the man who wrote it. Now we arrive in the present, a digital world shaped by the schism, but also brimming with new attempts to reverse it. Privacy laws are being drafted and redrafted across continents. The European Union's GDPR, California's Privacy Act, debates over data sovereignty in Africa and Asia, all of these are belated attempts to claw back what Carter's pillars would have built in by design. On the technical side, a new wave of decentralized protocols is emerging. Self-sovereign identity lets you store your credentials in a wallet you control. End-to-end encryption has gone mainstream in apps like Signal, iMessage, and WhatsApp. Open payment rails, from instant bank transfers to stablecoins, try to offer neutral channels outside the grip of a single platform. But the old patterns are still powerful. A handful of companies dominate cloud infrastructure, social graphs, and app distribution. Network effects lock users in. Convenience trumps autonomy. And yet, every time a data breach hits the headlines, every time a platform bans a community overnight, the public glimpses the cost of centralization. This is why Carter's story matters now. It isn't nostalgia for a path not taken. It's a blueprint for a path still open. His three pillars, user-controlled identity, default encryption, cooperative commerce, are not relics. They're live options. They're building blocks for a different future, if enough people demand them. Think about your own digital life. How many passwords do you juggle? How many platforms hold copies of your conversations, your location, your friends' names? How often do you click, "I agree," without reading? Every one of those moments is an echo of the schism. You don't have to be a coder to push for change. You can support services that respect privacy. You can ask hard questions of the platforms you use. You can experiment with open-source alternatives. Most of all, you can tell these stories, the deleted scenes of the digital age, so that the next generation knows they have choices. Because the Silicon Valley schism is just one chapter in a much larger book. A forgotten preamble that could have changed a nation. An unsent letter that could have freed an emperor. An overlooked cluster that could have altered a pandemic. All of them remind us, history isn't static. It's full of drafts, detours, and decisions. Some deleted scenes will never be restored, but some can be rewritten in real time. The internet you're using to watch this isn't finished. Its next chapter isn't written. And maybe, just maybe, the lost manifesto of 1996 can still become the constitution of a freer, more open. The Forgotten Preamble, a revolutionary revelation. Tonight, our journey through deleted scenes of history moves from silicon and servers to parchment and quills. We open a box, not of microchips, but of mottled vellum. A box that has slept undisturbed in a quiet corner of an archive, until now. In this part of our story, we're not in California, but in Philadelphia, 1787. The room is sweltering, shutters closed. Delegates argue about the very soul of a nation. Yet what you think you know about the birth of the United States, the famous words, "we the people," might not be the first words at all. Hidden among routine records and correspondence, historians have unearthed a draft nicknamed the Jeffersonian Draft, a working preamble to the U.S. Constitution that reads strikingly differently from the one engraved in our memories. Its tone? More radical, more populist, and more suspicious of centralized state power. To understand its meaning, we must go back to the spring of 1787. Delegates from 12 states convene at the Pennsylvania State House. Jefferson is in Paris, but his ideas are everywhere, letters, notes, arguments whispered over ale. This early draft carries phrases like, "from the free communities of America," rather than "we the people of the United States." It speaks of voluntary union rather than a single indissoluble republic. In other words, a constitution that privileges the people first, the states second, and the federal government third. How did this document disappear? Some scholars suggest it was quietly set aside by the drafting committee after heated debates over sovereignty and the fear of mob rule. Others believe it was never formally presented, just a working paper that Jefferson's allies circulated to push back against stronger central power. Whatever the case, it lay dormant, mislabeled, until digitization projects swept dusty archives into online databases. In 2019, an intern at a small historical society scanning miscellaneous papers flagged an odd file. Inconsistent handwriting, but signed by a known delegate. Cross-reference after cross-reference confirmed it. This was an authentic early draft, never before published in full. What does it actually say? In upcoming parts we'll read excerpts, compare them line by line to the familiar preamble, and trace why its populist emphasis threatened powerful interests. We'll also hear from constitutional scholars who argue that if this draft had prevailed, the balance between states and federal power, and even today's political debates, might look radically different. History is not fixed. Even the first words of a nation can change when a different sheet of paper is chosen. Stay with us as we unroll the parchment and listen to a preamble America never got to hear. What did the parchment actually say? As we unfold its brittle edges and bring the ink back to life under the glow of a digital scanner, a very different opening line greets us. Not "we the people of the United States," but "from the free communities of America, joined in mutual defense and liberty, do we establish this Constitution." A mouthful, yes, but also a mission statement. It announces a collection of communities, not a monolithic nation. It reads as if the Constitution is a compact among equals, rather than a charter creating a central authority. The next sentences reinforce this theme. Instead of the familiar list of purposes, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. This draft says to preserve local self-government, to protect the liberties of the citizen, to provide for mutual defense, to promote the common prosperity, and to secure the natural rights of all. The ordering is different, the tone is different, and the emphasis on natural rights and local self-government leaps from the page. Imagine if that wording had survived the debates of 1787. Imagine a country where every federal policy could be challenged on the grounds that it threatened local self-government. Imagine a judiciary whose first test of constitutionality was not, "Is this within enumerated powers?" but, "Does this respect the voluntary union of free communities?" That is the alternative history glimpsed in this lost preamble. As the historian who first digitized the draft has noted, the handwriting matches that of a junior clerk assigned to take down committee discussions. The marginal notes include initials of two prominent delegates. One reads J.M., likely James Madison. Another reads G.M., possibly Gouverneur Morris, who ultimately drafted the language we know today. These marks suggest the document circulated in the room where it happened, not in some later pamphlet war. Why was it shelved? Letters from the summer of 1787 show a growing fear among some delegates that the Constitution would be too weak to hold the states together. Shays' rebellion had shaken elites. They worried about a populist tide overrunning property rights. A preamble that celebrated local self-government and natural rights over a strong central government seemed to them like an engraved invitation to future chaos. And so, during a crucial week in August, the Committee on Style produced a new opening paragraph, shorter, bolder, and tilting power toward the center. When that happened, the Jeffersonian draft disappeared into a pile of working papers. No one burned it. No one stamped secret on the cover. It was simply forgotten, misfiled, and later boxed with routine correspondence from Pennsylvania's state archives. For more than 2 centuries it sat on a shelf, until a digitization project swept up its pages and algorithms flagged it for further review. This is where the story crosses into our time. In an age of mass digitization, of searchable scans and machine learning, we are not only saving history, we are rediscovering it. That anonymous intern in 2019 clicked upload and saw a line that made no sense. A constitution beginning from the free communities of America. A few emails later, and the world's historians were poring over images of a document that had not been read since the delegates folded it up in 1787. Even now, the discovery is controversial. Some scholars argue it is merely a fragment, not a full preamble. Others say it was a rhetorical exercise, not an official draft. But everyone agrees it offers a rare window into the fluidity of America's founding moment, a reminder that the text we memorize today was only one of several competing visions. As you listen to these words, think about how our debates over federal and state power echo those of 1787. Think about how movements from left and right invoke "we the people" to support their arguments. And then imagine an alternative world where the first words of the Constitution were "from the free communities of America." How different would our politics, our courts, and our sense of nationhood be? That is the power of a lost preamble, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a mirror held up to the present. If words shape nations, then missing words can shape them even more. As we step back from the brittle parchment and look across the centuries, the question arises, what would America look like if this forgotten preamble had become the first sentence of the Constitution? Begin with the judiciary. The Supreme Court's earliest cases were about the balance of power between the federal government and the states. Under the actual preamble, justices often read an implied strength for national authority. But with a preamble declaring "from the free communities of America," the guiding principle might have been the opposite. Cases like McCulloch v. Maryland, which upheld the federal bank, could have been decided in favor of state power. The long arc of constitutional interpretation might have bent away from federal supremacy and toward a loose confederation, more like the European Union than the United States we know. Consider civil rights. In our real history, the 14th Amendment became the key to expanding national protections for individuals. But under a constitutional culture, steeped in local self-government, federal intervention in segregation or voting rights might have been far weaker. Progress could have been slower, fragmented, or even blocked entirely. The same principle that empowered communities might also have protected discrimination within them. The lost preamble's emphasis on natural rights sounds inspiring, but without a strong central enforcement it could easily have remained a noble aspiration rather than a guarantee. Yet there is another side. The same draft that elevated local self-government also highlighted the natural rights of all. If that phrase had been enshrined from the beginning, abolitionists and suffragists might have wielded it as a sword against local injustice. Court decisions could have read the phrase broadly to strike down laws infringing individual freedom. In other words, a different preamble might have slowed some forms of federal power but accelerated others. Think about economic policy. A union of free communities might have resisted the rise of a national income tax or centralized regulation. The New Deal, which expanded federal authority over banking, labor, and social welfare, could have faced constitutional roadblocks impossible to overcome. Instead of one social security system, there might have been 50. Instead of national environmental standards, a patchwork of local rules. The very idea of an integrated national economy could have evolved along a slower, more fractured path. And think about the political culture. In this alternative history, citizens might identify first with their state or community and only second with a national identity. Political campaigns would revolve around coalitions of localities rather than mass national parties. Disputes over issues like education, healthcare, and policing would rarely reach Washington because Washington would have little authority to impose uniform standards. Some listeners may hear this and feel relief. Others may hear it and feel alarm. That is the power of a single paragraph. The preamble we have is just one of several drafts debated in a closed room in Philadelphia. This lost version offers a glimpse of another, America, one where decentralization and natural rights define the nation's DNA from the start. When you look at today's debates over states' rights, federal regulations, or even pandemic policies, you are seeing shadows of that old fight. Advocates on both sides now invoke "we the people" to make their case. But imagine them invoking from the free communities of America instead. The emotional weight, the legal arguments, even the slogans on banners would feel different. History is not only about what happened, but about what almost happened. The Forgotten Preamble is a reminder that at the founding moment, multiple futures were on the table. The one we live in was chosen by a handful of men, behind closed doors, on a humid Philadelphia afternoon. Another could have been chosen. That is why this discovery matters. It is not just a dusty curiosity for scholars. It is a living counterfactual, a mirror in which we can see our present and our possibilities. 2 centuries of silence. For 2 centuries, the Jeffersonian draft sat in a plain folder, filed with mundane correspondence, its ink fading and its edges curling. Generations of researchers walked past the shelf, chasing other stories. Then, in the second decade of the 21st century, the age of digitization reached even the smallest county archives. An intern scanning miscellaneous papers for an online catalog noticed something odd. A preamble beginning from the free communities of America. It did not match any known edition. The intern paused, took screenshots, and sent an email to a supervisor. Within days, high-resolution images were on the desks of constitutional scholars across the country. A lost voice from 1787 had been brought back to life by a scanner and a student on summer break. That is how history works now. Not through locked rooms and exclusive privileges, but through open data, crowdsourcing, and 1,000 curious eyes combing through digital stacks. In the 18th century, drafts circulated in secrecy. In the 21st, they go viral. Within weeks, legal blogs were debating the document's authenticity. Journalists wrote think pieces about the Constitution that might have been. Some commentators dismissed it as a rhetorical exercise, a rough note never meant for adoption. Others treated it as a missing Rosetta Stone for American federalism. Conferences sprang up. Law reviews published special issues. Even politicians began to cite it as evidence for their preferred reading of the Constitution. What does that tell us? It tells us that the words of 1787 still matter, not only to historians, but to everyone who lives under laws written in their shadow. It tells us that the debate over local versus national power is not an artifact of the past, but a living question. And it tells us that the boundary between history and the present is porous. We live in a time of renewed archival digging. Millions of pages are being scanned. Algorithms flag anomalies. Volunteers transcribe handwritten notes for online platforms. In the process, hidden drafts, forgotten letters, and suppressed reports resurface. Each discovery changes the way we see the past, and sometimes the way we act in the present. The Jeffersonian draft is a perfect example. It has inspired new scholarship on the founding period. It has also inspired a broader reflection on how fragile our canonical texts really are. If the first words of the Constitution could have been different, what else could have been different? And so this lost preamble becomes more than an academic curiosity. It becomes a touchstone for civic imagination. When you hear "we the people" in a speech or read it in a textbook, you can also hear the ghostly echo of another beginning from the free communities of America. Two openings, two visions, one nation forever negotiating between them. A sheet of paper folded in 1787 and opened in 2019. Two worlds touching across time. That is the magic of a lost preamble, but its magic does not end with scholars and scanners. It extends to you. Every archive has boxes no one has opened in decades. Every town museum has letters tucked into folders with bland labels. Every family attic has diaries and receipts that, to the right eyes, could illuminate forgotten corners of history. The Jeffersonian draft was not found by a tenured professor. It was found by a student who paused over a few strange words. History is not static. It is not a stone tablet carved once and for all. It is a living record, constantly revised as new evidence surfaces. The documents you grew up learning about were themselves selections, drafts chosen, others discarded, still others lost entirely. Each rediscovery adds a missing puzzle piece, and the picture of the past changes again. This is why the deleted scenes matter. They remind us that behind every familiar story there is a shadow story, versions unwritten, ideas unadopted, paths not taken. They also remind us that the distance between official history and hidden history can be as small as a mislabeled box or a forgotten file. When you think about your own community, about the local archives or the stories passed down in your family, consider what might be sitting quietly, waiting to be rediscovered. Maybe it is a letter, maybe a photo, maybe a list of names. Each can become a clue, a spark, a missing piece of a larger narrative. The Forgotten Preamble shows how powerful such a rediscovery can be. It reshapes debates over federal and state power. It reframes our sense of the founding era. It reveals how fragile even our most sacred texts really are. And it shows that the next big find may not come from a government vault or a famous university, but from an ordinary person's curiosity. As you listen to the next parts of this series, Napoleon's unsent letter, the tech titan's lost manifesto, the overlooked warning signs of a pandemic, remember that you, too, are part of this ongoing excavation. The unwritten chapters of history are not sealed. Stay curious. Ask questions. Visit archives. Read footnotes. Share what you find, because the most important deleted scenes may not be hiding in the past at all. They may be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone like you to bring them back into the light. From the lost preamble that could have rewritten America's founding words, to the secret letter that might have changed the fate of an emperor, we have glimpsed how fragile history really is. Drafts vanish, messages are intercepted, and the versions we inherit are only one of many possible pasts. These two stories are just the beginning. Across archives and attics, other deleted scenes are waiting, a tech titan's silenced manifesto, a pandemic's overlooked warning. They are the next chapters in this series, and we will unearth them together in another episode. For now, remember this. Every document, every letter, every forgotten draft holds a potential new history. Stay curious, keep looking, and you may be the one to find the next lost chapter.